Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Ange Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 11 quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be covering a variety of topics, but we'll begin with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks and tight ends thus far this season on average, in order to give us some perspective as to who has the most advantageous matchups going into this respective week. Then after we talk about this week's matchups, of course, we'll talk about the rest of season strength of schedule at the quarterback and tight end positions, because of course, many of you will have a trade deadline at the end of this week. Of course, tomorrow we will be talking about some trade targets for those of you who are trying to, of course, kind of get your rosters ready for the playoffs. Outside of that, we'll go ahead and transition and talk about our top 16 quarterback rankings and top 16 tight end rankings, giving you guys my perspective and opinions and the statistics that justify my rankings as to why I think the quarterback and tight end positions are going to stack up as such when all is said and done by the end of week 11. Before we begin, I want to thank you guys for continuing the support. For those of you who are new to the channel and have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. We're making fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2021 season, whether it is rankings videos, trade targets, potentially hidden gems, live streams. We're going to be having a live stream after tonight's Thursday night football game. For those of you who are interested, you can stop on by. We'll be talking fantasy, helping you set your lineups and get your rosters ready for a championship push, because the entire objective of this channel is to help you win a 2021 fantasy football championship. So be sure to subscribe. Outside of that, if you guys haven't checked them out already, Underdog Fantasy, it's another way to play fantasy football, playing weekly contest pick'ems. Again, later tonight, there's the Thursday night football contest between, of course, the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons. You can go ahead today and sign up using promo code Andrew. Underdog Fantasies will win a match up to $100 of your first deposit and play in tonight's contest and try to win yourself some great money. Again, you draft a team and get yourself ready to compete with thousands of other fantasy participants in order to show your dominance across the fantasy landscape. It's something that I talk about often, and I have a lot of fun, going ahead and following that and drafting teams every single week. So if you're interested, again, use promo code Andrew today and use the link down in the description of the video. Thank you very much. All right. Let's get into our Week 11 slate between the quarterback and tight end position. We will begin with quarterbacks, and of course, we'll talk about matchups. As you can see to the very left of the screen, we have 2021 quarterback fantasy points allowed, talking about how many points respective defenses are giving up to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season on average in a 4-point per passing touchdown format. As you can see, the Washington football team, Kansas City Chiefs, Atlanta Falcons, they are giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks. And typically, we want to go ahead and take advantage of said matchups. So Cam Newton playing against Washington, that is probably a streaming option for those of you who may be missing a Teddy Bridgewater Teddy Bridgewater is probably a super flex or 2 QB league play, or even Matthew Stafford this week. Also, we have the Atlanta Falcons playing tonight, playing against, of course, Mac Jones. He could be a streaming option for those of you who are interested. Of course, the Tennessee Titans give up a lot of points, but Tyrod Taylor isn't as safe of a pick based on his recent performances and his injuries. But now that we've talked about the top end in terms of who is giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks this season already, we'll look at the bottom half. Of course, these are the matchups you typically don't want to play. These defenses have been solid all season long, and though many of these defenses have respectively benefited from the fact that they've had softer strength of schedules in comparison to others, yes, the New England Patriots, the Buffalo Bills, we know that they're always great defensively. The Carolina Panthers at times have shown weaknesses against top-tier quarterbacks like a Dak Prescott, while some of these other inexperienced and young quarterbacks haven't really, panned out versus them in their respective matchups. But now that we've gone ahead and talked about the Week 11 strength of schedule, giving you guys some perspective as to who has the most advantageous matchups, you can go ahead and pause here. But I wanted to go ahead and transition and talk about the rest of season strength of schedule at the quarterback position for those of you who are trying to get ready for your playoff push. Now, in terms of the strength of schedule between weeks 11 through 17, the graphic on the very left, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, Dallas Cowboys, Las Vegas Raiders at the very top in terms of expected fantasy points scored per week from their respected quarterbacks. So these teams have the easiest strength of schedules going forward based on the statistics that we've seen on the prior page. You took the overall points that defenses are giving up to opposing quarterbacks, insert that to the rest of the season schedule, and go ahead and find the averages, and this is what we found. Those are the teams with the easiest strength of schedules going forward, and perhaps you want to have those players on roster. We're talking about Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Derek Carr. Ben Roethlisberger hasn't been great, probably will not be rest of the season. If Trey Lance takes the starting quarterback job from Jimmy G, maybe Jimmy G could end up having himself some value rest of the season. Russell Wilson, we have Carolina Panthers quarterback Cam Newton. Some good options there for those of you who are interested. Now, in terms of the fantasy football playoff schedule, weeks 15 through 17, again, this is just really a matter of have you won enough games to solidify yourself a first round bye? Have you won enough to at least get into the playoffs? If you have, maybe you can look forward to the final 3 weeks of the season and begin to plot your path to success. If in fact you're going after a Dallas Cowboy quarterback and you want to trade for Dak right now because you love the schedule, maybe that's a plan of action that you can go ahead and pursue. Either way, I do have more thoughts on the matter and more detailed description in the video that I posted last Friday. I'll put it up here for those of you who are interested. Outside of that, let's go ahead and transition and talk about our top 16 quarterback rankings for Week 11. All right, beginning with our number one. Again, do not forget, rankings are subject to change. Again, there are many injuries that we are only now this morning and as of the rest of the week going to first hear about. It is going to definitely impact the overall potential of a quarterback if their top running back or their top offensive lineman or the top receiving option is not going to play this week. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and make sure that we're ready to go. Our number one for this week is Lamar Jackson, quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I understand. Last week, I had Lamar Jackson as my number one. And many of you wanted to come back and comment down below, Andrew, this didn't age well. I get it. We get it. Listen, Lamar Jackson was under a lot of pressure. I mean, the safeties for the Miami Dolphins blitzed, 38 times? The article that I read said that was the most zero blitzes that a quarterback has seen since 2015. Obviously, he had no time to, pretty much stay in the pocket. He had no time to scramble, much less. I mean, this was one of his lower rushing yard games with only 39 yards in comparison to the 2 weeks prior, 120 and 88. And those obviously gave him his value. I think Lamar will be fine against the Chicago Bears. They're giving up the 13th most points to opposing quarterbacks. I think as Rashad Bateman's continuing to get better and continuing to get more experience in this offense, we already know that the backfield's going to be ready to go. We know that Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews, they're studs. The offensive line has played well, but obviously needs to get a little bit better in terms of picking up some of these blitz packages. But either way, I'm sure they'll be ready to go. They're on 10 days of rest. They should be great this upcoming week against Chicago's defense. Moving on to Patrick Mahomes. Now, last week, this time, I didn't have too much confidence in Patrick Mahomes. I was beginning to buy into the potential slide that Patrick Mahomes was having. But luckily, he was able to come out, throw the ball 50 times, have a 70% passing completion percentage, throw for over 400 yards and 5 touchdowns. Beautiful. Now, hopefully, this isn't going to disappear because he did this a couple weeks back against the Philadelphia Eagles in which he threw 3 touchdowns to Tyreek Hill and had himself a pretty decent fantasy game. But I'm hoping because he didn't throw any interceptions, because, he was really just hot off the rip, and very seldom do we see the Patrick Mahomes of weeks past, kind of rear his head out in that game last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm confident in saying that Patrick Mahomes against the Dallas Cowboys, it should be a higher scoring matchup. Both these teams should be scoring a lot of points, and if Patrick Mahomes is done with those days of throwing interceptions, getting back to being himself, he's going to be a fantastic play for us. Moving on to Josh Allen, our number 3. Josh Allen had himself a great game against the New York Jets. I mean, it's as good as it's going to get considering how bad the Jets are in terms of stopping the run. Of course, Matt Breida had himself a rushing touchdown, Zach Moss had himself a rushing touchdown, and so did Devin Singletary. So obviously, a lot of the points could have went in the direction of Josh Allen, but it was a blowout nonetheless. When Mike White's throwing 4 interceptions on the other side of the field, of course, Josh Allen's going to have to, take a little bit of a break. They're just going to run the ball the entire time. This upcoming week, it is a very exciting matchup against another AFC division rival, the Indianapolis Colts. That AFC, they've got a lot of depth there. Even their worst teams are really good. So this is going to be an exciting one between the two teams. The Indianapolis Colts, they're giving up the 5th most points to opposing quarterbacks. I mean, it just was a couple weeks back that the Jets quarterbacks, Josh Johnson and Mike White, had themselves 4 combined touchdowns against this defense. The Indianapolis Colts are going to be in trouble. Josh Allen should be able to tear them up. Moving on to Dak Prescott, our number 4. Again, Dak Prescott playing against the Kansas City Chiefs, giving up the 2nd most points to opposing quarterbacks. Dak Prescott's been incredible this season. I mean, he has, in his 8 games already, 7 games of 2 or more touchdowns. Prior to this past week, he had himself 6 games of 3+ touchdowns this season already. The amount of consistency that he has shown is just there, and it's going to continue to pile up for him, hopefully, as we continue. We obviously, in the last 2 weeks, have seen some performances against Denver, which was extremely underwhelming. He still found himself garbage time points, and in this last week in which they completely blew out the Atlanta Falcons. So in both contests, either one of them, he didn't do anything in the first half and got everything done in the second half. And then on the other end, against Atlanta, did everything in the first half, didn't do anything in the second half. Hopefully we'll get a full game of Dak Prescott, and especially considering it's against a high-scoring rival, hopefully it may be the Dak Prescott that we saw in Week 1, in which it's a shootout and he is just throwing the ball the entire time. Moving on to Tom Brady, our number 5. Speaking of throwing the ball the entire time, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers currently have thrown the ball the most in the National Football League per week. and they're probably going to continue to do so. Now, unfortunately, last week, Tom Brady had a couple mistakes early on in that game that certainly did pin his team back in a scenario in which, of course, they couldn't crawl themselves out of. But I think this upcoming week, playing against the New York Giants, I know Brady in his New York Giant history, he played against them last year, threw for 2 touchdowns. Hopefully, is going to have himself one of those upside performances this season already. In the 9 games that he has played, in 8 of them, he's gone ahead and scored 2 or more touchdowns. The only game in which he didn't score a touchdown, you want to guess it, it's the New England Patriots game. So, obviously, I think he'll be back on track. I think this offense will be healthier than it was certainly last week, considering Chris Godwin had himself some issues there. The chances are we probably won't see Gronkowski or AB in the lineup, but that really hasn't stopped Tom Brady from succeeding in the last couple weeks. He should be fantastic as a play in week 11. Moving on, we have Jalen Hurts, the quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles. Listen, Jalen Hurts has had a little bit of I would say a slate or a streak of underwhelming performances considering the matchups. He played against Detroit. They blew them out, didn't have to do anything. The following week, played against the Los Angeles Chargers again. That was a relatively difficult matchup, but still, was able to find some success. They were able to run the ball very effectively. And in this last week, had himself a great game. 2 passing touchdowns against Denver. That is not an easy task. Honestly, it really isn't. Considering he was 16 for 23 passing. Yes, got himself his rushing yardage total, 55 yards. I mean, this season already, every single game he's at least had a minimum of 30 rushing yards. So he's getting himself 3 points there. But the upside is certainly going to be there. He's had, games of multiple rushing touchdowns. The upside is always going to be there, and that is why we continue to rank him as high as we do. Playing against the New Orleans Saints, he has a pretty good history against this defense. Last season, his first start of his NFL career, he played against the New Orleans Saints. He ran for over 100 rushing yards and ran all over a defense that we widely know as one of the best run-stopping defenses in the National Football League, considering they're only giving up like 2.8 yards per carry to running backs this season. Maybe Jalen Hurts has himself, the secret skeleton key to being able to run on that defense. And if that's going to be the case, once again this season, he'll be fantastic as our number 6. Moving on to number 7, we have Aaron Rodgers. Now, Aaron Rodgers this week has been dealing with a toe injury. As of what I've read, he did not practice yesterday or earlier this morning. So hopefully it's not going to impede him. Maybe that was the issue as to why he wasn't able to play up to his overall potential in week 10, but I think it will get past that. We'll, of course, have Devontae Adams ready. Marcus Valdes-Scantling back in the lineup, has a week under his belt. Allen Lazard as well is back. They will not have Aaron Jones, but A.J. Dillon will very easily be able to, pick up the slack in that regard. In the last 2 games that he's played against the Minnesota Vikings, he has thrown for 7 total touchdowns. There's a lot of success to be had against this defense, and though they have played well all season, and really just as of the last couple weeks have been playing better and better, defensively, they're going to get Harrison Smith back. They're going to get a little bit more momentum in that regard, but I think Aaron Rodgers, at the end of the day, is going to be able to impose his will and put up some great points against that Minnesota secondary that he's so experienced against over the years. Moving on to our number 8, Kyler Murray. Speaking of another injured quarterback, Kyler Murray hasn't played since that Thursday night game against Aaron Rodgers, who stands to the left of him. Now, obviously, he's been dealing with an ankle injury. They technically do not have to play him this week because they have a bye week next week. And if they're truly trying to make a push for the Super Bowl, then they probably should hold him out. But if, in fact, he's going to play, I wanted to go ahead and put him on screen just to give you some perspective. I currently have Kyler Murray at 8 because if he plays, he's too dynamic of a player to not keep in my starting lineup. Even if DeAndre Hopkins is not going to play, and I don't expect him to play. That's why he wasn't ranked in yesterday's video. And I'm sure regardless of who's surrounding him, with no Chase Edmonds and no DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk, AJ Green, Rondell Moore, James Conner, Zach Ertz, they'll certainly be able to pick up the slack and help him succeed this upcoming week. Moving on to our number 9, we have Joey Burrow coming off of the bye week. Now, the last time we saw Joe Burrow, he did not have a great performance against the Cleveland Browns. He had himself 0 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, obviously 1 for a pick 6 for over 100 yards. I understand it. It is unfortunate. But that being said, prior to that last performance against Cleveland, he had 8 consecutive games of 2 or more touchdowns scored. Now, also prior to that performance against Cleveland, he had 3 consecutive games of 3 or more touchdowns. So again, he was on a streak, had himself 1 bad game. It happens to every quarterback, and so be it. But we're still going to trust Joe Burrow playing against the Las Vegas Raiders this week. I mean, we just saw Patrick Mahomes come off of a 400 passing yard, 5 touchdown game when all of us were thinking, well, Patrick Mahomes might be broken. If there's any doubt, obviously he's not anymore. But I think Joe Burrow, in such a favorable matchup with the weapons that he has surrounding him, is an absolute play and our number 9. Moving on to number 10, Justin Herbert, another one of these younger quarterbacks in their second year having themselves success at the quarterback position. He takes on the Pittsburgh Steelers. It is a tough matchup. And the way that Justin Herbert has played as of late really hasn't found that much success. He's kind of off and on at times, but hopefully we're going to get back on track this week in comparison to last week, which he had a 58.8% passing completion percentage. That is not Herbert-like. You go back to his rookie year, very seldom did he put up those kind of performances. He's almost having his rookie year this season, and the 2020 year was just like an anomaly of sorts. But either way, hopefully the inconsistencies are going to go away. We have guys like Larry Roundtree stealing touchdowns from Austin Eckler. But hopefully we're going to get a couple more passing touchdowns because of how good the Pittsburgh Steelers are in terms of stopping the run, bend but don't break. Yes, they give up yardage on the ground, but very seldom do they give up touchdowns on the goal line. Hopefully Justin Herbert will get himself, of course, Keenan Allen involved, but Mike Williams is going to be the key to the upside this week. Moving on to our number 11, it is Ryan Tannehill playing against the Houston Texans, who are giving up the 7th most points to opposing quarterbacks. Ryan Tannehill is coming off of a great game in which he had a 70% passing completion percentage, a rushing touchdown along with a passing touchdown for 18.62 fantasy points. Since Ryan Tannehill has become the starting quarterback of the Tennessee Titans, in the last 4 games that he's played against the Houston Texans, he has scored a total of 12 touchdowns. If he's going to be averaging 3 touchdowns per game, regardless of who's in the backfield, of course, a lot of success is going to be found. I talked about it yesterday. On yesterday's thumbnail, it was A.J. Brown for a reason. A.J. Brown has not scored less than 20 points in the last 4 games against Houston. Both these guys are going to connect and find themselves a lot of fantasy upside this week. Moving on to Russell Wilson. Now, he plays against the familiar foe, the Arizona Cardinals. Typically, in his career, he has had himself great games against them, but most recently in 2020, 5 passing touchdowns against them. 4 of those in which went to Tyler Lockett against the Arizona Cardinals. I think as long as Russell Wilson can get into this week, get some practice under his belt, and then get ready to go. A lot of people were talking about rust. I think it's more about dust that was, kind of settled on his arm. As soon as they wipe off the dust, he'll go back to being Russell Wilson. They're going to let Russ cook as the running game is pretty much in shambles without Chris Carson back there. I think they're going to have to just let this man throw the ball and find a lot of success. And that's what the case is going to be this week, as of course the Arizona Cardinals secondary, they've given up their fair share of points. Moving on, we have Cam Newton as our number 13, the top of I would say the top level of waiver wire kind of pick up in immediate plays, streaming options for Week 11. Cam Newton plays against the Washington football team. His former coach Ron Rivera at Carolina. It's going to be bittersweet. Finally, he's going to be a starting quarterback once again in the National Football League and for his former team. It's going to be exciting. Now, obviously, there's a lot of value to be had here. Besides the fact that it's the easiest matchup at the quarterback position, we're talking about Cam Newton, who came in for only a couple plays last week and scored 2 touchdowns. Had 11.72 fantasy points. I mean, he almost had as much points as Justin Herbert, and Herbert played a full game in which he threw the ball 34 times. He had more points than Carson Wentz last week, who played a full game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So my expectation is, yes, Cam Newton's going to succeed. He's going to come in. He's got incredible pieces around him. I mean, in comparison to the last time he played for the Carolina Panthers, the weapons around him weren't as stable. DJ Moore has become a significantly better receiving option. Robbie Anderson has pretty much picked up that wide receiver 2 spot that they really didn't have in the past. Then you've gone ahead. You've got Christian McCaffrey improving every single year. The offensive line has gotten himself far better as they've signed and re-signed players that they've kind of drafted and improved over the years. In my opinion, Cam Newton, you got a great overall option this week and fantastic potential for fantasy. Moving on to Derek Carr, number 14. Derek Carr takes on the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals defense, as of late, really hasn't been able to stop anyone. The Jets and the Cleveland Browns both scored an unbelievable amount of points against this defense. I think Derek Carr and the Las Vegas Raiders are certainly watching film, preparing for this game. Derek Carr is a very consistent quarterback. He's typically 2 touchdowns every single game with 250 passing yards. If you need those kind of solid points, well, by all means, he's going to get that for you. His upside is probably, capped to an extent, but hopefully based on this matchup and the fact that a lot of teams have been scoring a lot on Cincinnati's defense, Derek Carr can unlock himself, get himself a 3rd touchdown this week. Moving on to Kirk Cousins, another one of these consistent quarterbacks that, again, puts up great performances, 2+ per week. Kirk Cousins has been great, takes on the Green Bay Packers. My only concern is that when they play against the Packers, they heavily rely upon the running game. And they just let, guys like Dalvin Cook run for years. I mean, the last 2 times that Dalvin Cook has played against this defense, he has scored 7 fantasy points and 27 fantasy points. It has been all Dalvin Cook all day when they play against this defense. Hopefully, we'll get a little bit of a change up here, and Kirk Cousins will be able to air it out like he did last week. Moving on to Tua Tagovailoa, our final quarterback option and last streaming option for this week. I think Tua has a lot of potential this week, mainly because he plays against the Jets, guys. I mean, really, the Jets in the last 5 consecutive games have given up 2+ touchdowns to every single opposing quarterback. Considering how bad they are at stopping quarterbacks and specifically stopping the run, it makes it that much easier for drives to continue, quarterbacks to get in the red zone, and of course, dice up defenses. I think there's a lot of potential to be had here, even without a lot of his weapons being active. There is no Devontae Parker. There is no Will Fuller. There is no problem. I think Tua is a great option for this week. All right, now that we've covered the quarterback position, let's transition and talk about the tight end position. Oftentimes, you have one tight end on a roster. You're starting that guy, and you're not worrying about it in any sort of capacity. So let's go ahead and do that right now. But before, let's talk about matchups at the position going into Week 11. To the very left of me, right here, we have 2021 tight end fantasy points allowed. Talking about how many points defenses are giving up to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. The Eagles, Ravens, Texans, Colts, Chargers, Chiefs, Rams, Buccaneers, Dolphins. They are giving up, the most points to opposing quarterbacks this season already. I mean, there has been 17 teams on this list that are giving up more than 10 points per week, but oftentimes we see explosive performances because people score touchdowns and because of how reliant tight ends have become for touchdown work. Oftentimes there is a little bit of a fluctuation, but the averages kind of sit in this region. Oftentimes the only thing that we want to avoid is playing tight ends against Arizona, Denver, New England, Minnesota, Chicago. These are some of these defenses that really are tough to play against, but it's not impossible to score against them. And we saw George Kittle put up a touchdown against that Arizona defense. We've seen tight ends play well against Bill Belichick, which was Dalton Schultz earlier this year. It's always a possibility. Is it going to happen a guaranteed process? I don't know. But that's exactly why I wanted to present the matchups, because it's another variable to give you guys some, kind of perspective as to who really has the better matchups and maybe who you want to lean with going into this upcoming weekend's contest. Now, after we talked about the matchups for Week 11, I want to talk about the rest of season strength of schedule at the tight end position. Again, on the very left side of the screen, we have weeks 11 through 17. While very nearest to me, we have weeks 15 through 17, the fantasy football playoffs. These are the tight ends, respectively, who are expected the most amount of points per week on average throughout those spectrums of time, weeks 11 through 17, 15 through 17, As of right now, the Washington football team, whoever it is, probably Logan Thomas, if he's available in your league, is a guy that you want to have on your bench or on your IR spot in order to make sure that you have him ready, because in the fantasy football playoffs, he is going to be balling out when he is healthy and ready to go. Outside of that, we have Cleveland, not really interested there. The Broncos, that's a great option with Noah Fant. We also have the Jets, Giants. I mean, there's a lot of teams that just, it doesn't really matter because you have your studs, and regardless of what they're going to face, you're going to play them anyway. But oftentimes, if you can find someone that's sneakily sitting on the waivers or maybe is cheaper in a perspective of trading for them, you may be able to get away with that and end up improving your roster and winning yourself a championship with that. Either way, now that we've talked about this, you can pause the screen, check it out. I'm going to go ahead and start beginning to talk about my top 16 tight end rankings of the week, beginning with number 1, Travis Kelce. Again, Travis Kelce, back-to-back weeks of scoring 15-plus fantasy points. He has been the number 1 overall tight end this season already, and in the last, 5 consecutive years. It is no surprise that he is back at number 1. Because he's here every week. I mean, he really is. Unless we're talking about Travis Kelce's bye week, that's the only week he's not here. Patrick Mahomes looks to be back with an incredible performance. And of course, we're starting this gentleman against Dallas's defense that is giving up the 13th most points to opposing tight ends. Let's talk about George Kittle. He himself has had 2 consecutive weeks of scoring a touchdown. Now, the reason why I wanted to specifically mention that, because though we see other tight ends accomplish this throughout the season often, when it happens to George Kittle, it's extremely rare, because when you look at George Kittle's career stats, he scores a handful of touchdowns every year. And now that we've kind of found ourselves in a streak of games in which he's scoring a lot of points, it is quite, a surprise to me, because he's coming off the injury and immediately finding success, which is fantastic. And hopefully that momentum is going to continue. The thing that I wanted to mention, in the last 2 weeks, he has ran a total of 48 total routes. He's been targeted 15 times. So it's about 31% of the time that he runs a route, the ball is going in his direction. Jimmy G knows that when George Kittle's running a route, the ball is intended to go in his direction. He's often finding himself open and finding a lot of success. Again, the last 2 weeks, 151 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. You can't ask for anything more as this guy takes on the Arizona Cardinals defense. But again, I'm not worried about it because it's George Kittle. Moving on, we have Darren Waller as our number 3. Now, I understand many of you may be a little upset about his performance last week, only 4.4 fantasy points. But let's remind you guys, on that game on Sunday night, Darren Waller had a touchdown called back because of a holding call on his offensive lineman. If that offensive lineman does his job, Darren Waller easily scores because he finds separation and he finds himself in the end zone with the ball in his hand. He would end up turning that 4.4 fantasy point performance into over 11 points. And that'd be fantastic for us. But unfortunately, it's not the case. So I don't want you guys to give up on Darren Waller. Please don't, because he really is a fantastic tight end in the National Football League, and he's going to prove that this week. In the last 2 games, the Cincinnati Bengals have given up a receiving touchdown once to opposing tight ends. There's a lot of potential to be had here, and I think Darren Waller, again, in my opinion, the top target in this offense, outside of course, Hunter Renfrow, based on his target counts as of late, is going to be a great option this week as our number 3. Moving on to Mark Andrews, our number 4. Another one of these automatic starts. It doesn't matter that this team plays against the Chicago Bears. It doesn't bother me. I mean, in fact, the Chicago Bears, the last time we saw them play was against the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday night. Pat Freiermuth, 5 catches, 43, 2 receiving touchdowns. For as much as I expect Lamar Jackson to succeed, of course, anytime Lamar Jackson's having himself those big games, Mark Andrews is going to have himself a great game. Even though his touchdown last week against Miami was in garbage time, it doesn't matter. This team is all about getting their number 1 respective options of, opportunity. Marquise Brown and, of course, Mark Andrews will get a boatload of targets this week. Both will succeed and be automatic plays. Moving on, Kyle Pitts, our number 5. I think this is when the questions begin to kind of pour in, because we know the top 4 are the top 4. But when we talk about the rest of the way, it begins to kind of get a little bit tricky, because we're talking about Kyle Pitts playing against Bill Belichick's defense. We all know that he likes to shut down tight ends. He likes to shut down number 1 options. But if Cordero Patterson plays, I expect Cordero Patterson to obviously be considered that number 1 option. But otherwise, Bill Belichick is going to probably try to lock down Kyle Pitts for the entire day. Luckily for Kyle Pitts, he really is a wide receiver. He's often lining up out wide, in the slot, on the inline, and just moving around at a variety of positions and finding himself work everywhere. So as long as this man is moving around, of course, they might try to double cover him the entire day. But I think he's far too talented to go ahead and leave on my bench regardless of the matchup. Sure, you might like another option instead of him, but in my opinion, if he's on my roster, he's in my starting lineup for tonight's game. Moving on to TJ Hockenson, one of these players that had literally 1 target but 0 catches this last week. At this point, Jared Goff, I think he's missed 2 practices in a row. If they play the backup this week, I think it actually helps TJ Hockenson, in all honesty, because the baseline of a quarterback just sending the ball in TJ Hawkinson's direction is probably going to be far greater than this last week. Now, of course, we're coming off of a couple weeks of where TJ Hawkinson was playing great, double-digit targets, and we weren't complaining. One bad week doesn't throw TJ Hawkinson off of the starting lineup in any capacity. He's a must-start every single week. He has incredible opportunity, and regardless of who's playing at the quarterback position this week, I think TJ Hawkinson has to start for you. Moving on to Mike Gesicki, another player that had himself 0 catches, but it's a little bit of a different scenario. Mike Gesicki still had himself 7 targets. In fact, with 14 minutes remaining in the 4th quarter, this man had himself 2 red zone opportunities in which there were both terrible passes from Tua. As long as those passes, improve a little bit this week, the opportunity was there, guys. He could have scored himself a touchdown, could have had himself a boatload of receptions, and honestly, that's all I can ask for. As long as the opportunity is there, he's proven enough to me this season already that I'm going to continue to start him and find a lot of success with him. Moving on, we have Hunter Henry, our number 8 overall tight end for this week, and currently the number 3 overall tight end in fantasy, considering in the last 7 weeks, he has scored 7 touchdowns. He literally is the Robert Tonyan of this season. I mean, a guy that wasn't really valued high, maybe was drafted, but drafted late as a second tight end on roster, and is just taken over as Mac Jones loves to throw him the ball, takes on the Atlanta Falcons this week. Again, I don't care about the matchup. As long as they get down to the red zone, play action, Hunter Henry's finding himself open. There's a reason why he scored 17 fantasy points this last week and had 2 receiving touchdowns. A great overall play as our number 8. Moving on to the second half of the quarterback conversation, we begin with Dalton Schultz. Again, Dalton Schultz, he's a great overall tight end. He plays against Kansas City, giving up the 7th most points to tight ends. This defense already has given up 6 touchdowns in the last 7 games to opposing tight ends. Bro, it is going to be pure money for Dalton Schultz. I don't really mind that Michael Gallup is back. I think his role in the 11 personnel that the Dallas Cowboys like to run almost the entire time is going to continue to build. He really didn't have to score too many fantasy points last week, considering it was 36-3 at halftime. Dalton Schultz will be a significantly better play this week. Pat Freiermuth is our number 10 with Big Ben Roethlisberger returning to the lineup. We even saw Pat Freiermuth get himself 9 targets last week against Detroit. even with a backup quarterback. He's become such an important part of this offensive scheme. Outside of Deontay Johnson and Najee Harris, he is the next option available. And down in the red zone, this man finds a lot of success. And going against the Los Angeles Chargers, giving up the 6th most points to opposing tight ends already this season. They've allowed 7 touchdowns to opposing tight ends. I mean, just talk about Tyler Conklin last week, scoring 2 of them. A lot of touchdowns can be had against the Los Angeles Chargers at the tight end position. Moving on to Dawson Knox, our number 11. Again, Dawson Knox didn't have himself the greatest week, but they did play against the Chargers. The running back position scored 4 touchdowns for the Buffalo Bills, and the rest was history. So be it. We'll take that. He gets the privilege of taking on the Indianapolis Colts, the 5th easiest matchup at the position. Jeff Swaim, 4 catches, 23 and a touchdown. We had, of course, Ryan Griffin, 4 catches, 28 and a touchdown. Dan Arnold, 5 catches, 67 yards, a 2-point conversion, was 2 yards short of scoring a touchdown, was caught barely on a slant route. There's a lot of potential to be had, as just recently in the last 3 performances, the Indianapolis Colts have suffered against tight ends. Dawson Knox has a lot of potential this week. Moving on to Dan Arnold. Speaking of him, again, like I just mentioned, this last week had himself a 2-point conversion that got him 11.2 fantasy points. The 2 weeks prior, 10.8 fantasy points and 8 fantasy points. In the last 3 weeks alone, only Travis Kelce has more targets than him. He has really been at this next tier of the tight end position and is beginning to get himself into this category of a trustworthy play every single given week. I think Dan Arnold taking on San Francisco, it doesn't bother me because he's catching the eye of Trevor Lawrence every time he runs a route. And that's hopefully going to continue to be the case as our number 12 this week. Moving on to Dallas Goedert. Now, last week, Dallas Goedert obviously didn't have a great performance, but you have to take into account he got a concussion and left the game. So you may have been wondering, why didn't Dallas Goedert do well? Well, he got a concussion. Hopefully, he's going to be cleared this week. If that's going to be the case, then I'm automatically playing him because he's such a huge option in this offense and such a pivotal part of getting down to the goal line and finding success down there. If he's not going to play, then obviously we won't roll with him. But if he's healthy and ready to go, similar to Kyler Murray, like I mentioned earlier, then he's starting for me. Moving on, we have Tyler Conklin. Speaking of the man who scored 2 touchdowns this last week, in the last 4 weeks, he has also found himself a lot of fantasy success in a half PPR scoring format. 8.6, 8.2, 7.0, 14.6, 24 targets in the last 4 weeks. That's 6 per week. If he can continue to get this kind of opportunity, it's always going to lead to success for a tight end that's so heavily used in his respective offense. Tyler Conklin, a fantastic play as a streaming option once again this week, taking on the Green Bay Packers, giving up the 14th most points to tight ends. We move on to Cole Kmet, coming off the bye week. The last time we saw Cole Kmet against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, had himself 87 receiving yards on 6 receptions, 11.7 fantasy points. Luckily, he plays against the Baltimore Ravens, giving up the 3rd most points to tight ends. Recently, CJ Uzomah, 3 catches, 91, 2 touchdowns. Conklin, 5 catches for 45 yards. Jared Cook, 4 catches, 25 yards and a touchdown. Mike Gesicki, of course, had himself 0 catches, but very easily could have had himself a touchdown plus a couple receptions on top of that, joining the rest of the tight ends that I mentioned. Either way, Cole Kmet becoming more and more a part of that, entire scheme and becoming one of Justin Fields' favorite overall targets. Moving on to our final tight end option. It is CJ Uzomah taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. I've talked about it. The Las Vegas Raiders cannot stop tight ends. Kelce, 8 catches, 119 and a touchdown. Noah Gray, the rookie tight end, scored a touchdown last week. Evan Ingram, 3 catches, 38 yards and a touchdown. Noah Fant, 9 catches, 97 and a touchdown. These are just recent performances. The Las Vegas Raiders are giving up the 2nd most points to tight ends. So why not let CJ Uzomah start in your lineup if you are in need of one and get a lot of points for it. These are my Week 11 quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. Thank you, everybody, for watching tonight. I do expect this to be a closer game than a lot of people anticipate. If the coaching really is the biggest difference maker, then Belichick wins out. But we've seen in the last couple weeks, kind of confusingly, Miami upsets the Baltimore Ravens. The week before, the Jets scored 30 points on the Indianapolis Colts. The week before that, somehow, someway, Denver lost to the Cleveland Browns without the Cleveland Browns having their 2 starting running backs and their 2 starting offensive tackles. There have been upsets on Thursday nights on a consecutive weekly basis. If it once again happens, even the Green Bay Packers beat the Arizona Cardinals without the Green Bay Packers having any of their starting receivers available. Upsets are a thing on Thursday night. Maybe the Atlanta Falcons win. Otherwise, I am anticipating the favorite to take this. I'm expecting the Patriots to win, but it may be closer than you anticipate. After the night game, I will be streaming here on the channel. So for those of you interested, check it out. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.